The alarm buzzed faintly in the background, but it wasn't what woke me. It was something else. The silence. Or rather, the absence of a sound I had grown used to, my daughter's door creaking open at precisely 7:08 a.m., followed by her soft footsteps and the clatter of a cereal bowl she never quite managed to grab quietly. Today, none of that came. I blinked the sleep from my eyes, frowning, a strange pressure building in my chest. The house was too still. I pushed the blanket aside and sat up, rubbing my face. The hallway outside my bedroom was dim, morning light struggling to bleed through the curtains, but something about it felt off. That sense you get when something's been moved just slightly out of place. I stepped out and padded toward the living room, expecting maybe to find her on the couch with a cartoon running, but what I saw instead froze me in place. There she was, my daughter, on the back porch, and she wasn't alone. Through the glass, I could see the two of them huddled close. Her, my daughter, leaning in towards someone I didn't immediately recognize. A girl, around her age, maybe a year older. Their heads bent together, whispering, sharing some secret I wasn't a part of. There was a lightness in her face I hadn't seen in months. A smile I didn't know she still had. It wasn't the scene that unsettled me, it was the realization that I had no idea who the other girl was. That my daughter, the one who barely talked to anyone after her father left, who had curled inward like a frightened animal, had let someone in, without ever telling me that. I backed away from the window, careful not to be seen. I don't know why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe because it felt like I was intruding on something delicate. But more than anything, it was fear. Fear that I had missed something important. That my daughter was building a world I wasn't invited into. My hand trembled as I gripped the edge of the counter. Questions swarmed. Who was this girl? How long had she been coming here? Why had my daughter kept her hidden? I waited, barely breathing, until the sliding door opened and the two of them stepped back inside. They were laughing, softly, but the laughter stopped the second she saw me standing there. Her eyes widened, and she froze. Mom, the silence was thick enough to choke on. I tried to speak but the words wouldn't come. She glanced nervously at the girl beside her, who gave me a timid nod before excusing herself with a polite, "Good morning." Her voice was gentle, respectful. But I barely registered it. My focus was on my daughter. Her shoulders were tight, jaw clenched, bracing for something. Disapproval? Anger? Disappointment. "I was going to tell you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Just, not like this." I finally found my voice. "Tell me what?" She didn't answer right away. Her hands twisted together in front of her, knuckles pale. The seconds dragged. "We're together," she said. "Me and Ava." It was like the air thinned all at once. I stared at her, this version of her that I didn't know yet. Not the child who clung to my hand in grocery stores or the teenager who slammed her door when she didn't want to talk. But someone else, someone I'd missed growing into her own skin. I didn't know how to say it, she added quickly. "I thought maybe you'd, what?" I interrupted. "Be angry?" Her eyes watered. Disappointed. That word hurt more than I expected. I took a slow breath, trying to make sense of the storm inside me. It wasn't disappointment. It was shock. It was the ache of being left behind in your own child's life. It was guilt for not noticing. For not making her feel safe enough to tell me sooner. I looked at her, really looked, and saw how afraid she was. Not of who she loved, but of how I might love her less because of it. That I stepped forward and pulled her into my arms. She tensed at first, then melted against me, shaking with held-back tears. "I'm not disappointed," I whispered. "I'm scared." Because I didn't know. But not of who you are. She cried harder. And I let her. Let her release all that tension she'd held in. Over her shoulder, I saw Ava waiting quietly near the door, hands folded in front of her, respectfully giving space that I nodded toward her. Do you want to introduce me properly? My daughter pulled back and smiled, tear-streaked but soft. Yeah. I'd like that. And just like that, the morning became something else entirely. Something fragile, but real. A door cracked open, not just into her life, but into mine. A chance to know the part of her that had been hidden for far too long. Ava stepped forward slowly, her footsteps quiet, careful. There was a respectful hesitation in the way she held herself, as if she was unsure how much space she was allowed to take up. Her eyes met mine for just a second, kind, but wary. I understood that look. She was measuring the room, bracing for judgment. I extended a hand, trying to steady my voice, trying to push through the complicated knot of emotions still swirling in my chest. Hi, Ava. It's nice to meet you. Her fingers were soft and cool against mine. She gave a small, grateful smile. Thank you for letting me stay this morning. I didn't mean to surprise you. The corners of her mouth tugged nervously, and I could tell she wasn't just talking about the visit. She was apologizing for existing in this space, in my daughter's life. That hurt in a way I wasn't ready for. I looked at my daughter again. God, when had she started looking like that? Taller, stronger, but also older. Like someone who had weathered more than I'd ever noticed. I couldn't help but feel I had missed something essential. My chest tightened with a quiet grief. Not for who she was, but for how much of her life I hadn't seen forming. You girls hungry? I asked, forcing a softness into my voice that I wasn't sure I had managed earlier. They exchanged a glance, then Ava shrugged. We could eat. I turned toward the kitchen, hands shaking slightly as I reached for the eggs. It was a normal act, but my mind raced. Every movement was soaked in the heaviness of things unspoken. I tried to focus on the sound of the eggs cracking, the sizzle of butter, the rhythm of breakfast. Something normal. Something safe. Behind me, they settled at the table, their voices low, a few giggles exchanged. It felt surreal. Just last week, I thought I knew everything about my daughter's world. Her homework. Her moods. Her favorite cereal. But now I realized I had only known the version of her she had chosen to show me. And that made my heart ache with a quiet kind of sadness. So, I said, sliding the eggs onto their plates, how long have you two been? I didn't finish the sentence. I wasn't even sure what word to use. Together? Dating? In love? Ava looked to my daughter, silently asking permission to speak. My daughter nodded. A few months, Ava said softly. We started talking last fall. After art club. It just, kind of happened. And you've been keeping it a secret this whole time? I asked, unable to hide the edge in my voice. My daughter shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I wanted to tell you. I just didn't know how. The honesty in her voice was undeniable. But it didn't ease the sting entirely. I had always promised her she could come to me with anything. But clearly, something in our home made her feel like she couldn't. That realization sat heavy in my gut. I'm not angry, I said finally. I just wish I'd known sooner. She looked at me then, and I saw the tears she was holding back. I was scared you'd look at me differently. I don't, I said quickly, firmly. You're still my girl. She smiled a little at that, the kind of smile that looked like it didn't quite believe me yet. But it was a start. The rest of breakfast passed in a gentle, uncertain quiet. They finished their food slowly, stealing little looks at each other, fingers brushing under the table when they thought I wasn't looking. Afterward, Ava helped clear the dishes. We worked side by side, the silence between us growing less awkward. "She's lucky to have you," Ava said suddenly, her voice low. "She talks about you all the time. Even when she was scared to tell you, she still said you were her hero." I paused, my hand submerged in soapy water, trying to blink back the unexpected sting behind my eyes. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means more than you know." She smiled again, small and kind. I saw it then, the reason my daughter had let this girl in. She wasn't just anyone. She was safe. Gentle. The kind of person who listened when you were too afraid to speak. And for the first time that morning, a bit of the tension in my chest unraveled. Later, after Ava left, the house was quiet again. My daughter stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes unsure. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "I think so. I didn't want to hide her from you," she said. "I just didn't want to lose you." I stepped closer and wrapped my arms around her. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo she always used. "You're not going to lose me," I whispered. "But I need you to promise something." She pulled back, blinking. "Anything. Don't shut me out. Even if you think I won't understand. Let me try." She nodded, and there was something so painfully mature in her face, like a child who had grown up too quickly. "Okay," she whispered. "I will." And just like that, something shifted. Not everything was solved. Not every fear erased. But there was space now, for truth, for love, for healing. For the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was still part of her world. And I wasn't ready to let that go. Not now. Not ever. The days that followed moved with a strange quiet between us. Not awkward, but cautious. Like walking across glass you didn't want to break. My daughter wasn't hiding anymore, but she wasn't fully open either. I could feel it in the way she spoke, carefully chosen words, testing the waters before saying too much. And I didn't blame her. Trust once dented doesn't come back quickly. It comes in pieces. Still, she smiled more. Her eyes were lighter. She hummed while brushing her hair, tapped her foot to music in the hallway. Ava's presence lingered, even when she wasn't around. Her name would slip into conversation softly, sometimes unintentionally, followed by the tiniest glance toward me, as if checking whether it was safe to go on. I let her talk. I listened. I held my reactions in my hands like delicate glass, trying not to break the fragile balance we were building again. It was a Thursday evening when she asked if Ava could come over again. "Just to hang out," she said. "Nothing big." I was folding laundry in the living room, and I paused, meeting her eyes. "Of course," I said. Her face lit up for a second, and then she nodded like it was no big deal, but I knew it was. I knew that asking me meant she was ready to test the bridge between us. Later that night, Ava showed up with a half-empty sketchbook under one arm and a shy smile. I offered snacks and then stepped back, giving them the space they needed. But I watched from the kitchen, just out of view, unable to help myself. The way Ava looked at my daughter wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet. Steady. Devoted. The kind of look that doesn't shout but never fades either. I had never seen someone look at my daughter like that. Not even her father. It made my heart ache, in a way I couldn't explain. Not because it was wrong, but because it was right, and I had almost missed it. That night, after Ava left, my daughter sat with me in the living room. The TV was on but muted, casting soft blue light against the walls. She didn't say anything at first. Just leaned into my side, head resting on my shoulder the way she used to when she was little. My hand moved on instinct, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You really like her," I said, not as a question, but as something I was finally ready to name. She nodded against my arm. "I do." Her voice cracked just slightly. "She makes me feel seen." My throat tightened. I thought about all the years she'd spent shrinking herself, hiding away pieces of who she was. "You deserve that," I said. "To be seen. Fully." She was quiet for a long time, and I thought maybe she had fallen asleep. But then she whispered, "Do you think Dad would have hated me for this?" I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. That question cut through the air like ice. I turned to her slowly, lifting her chin to meet my eyes. "No," I said, firm and steady. "And if he would have, then he didn't deserve you anyway." She stared at me, and something deep in her face shifted. Relief. Sadness. Release. All tangled together. "He always wanted me to be the girl he pictured in his head," she said. "And I never was." "I'm sorry," I said, pulling her close again. "But you don't have to be anyone else anymore. Not for me. Not for anyone." She cried, but it was quiet. Cleansing. The kind of cry that doesn't need fixing, just witnessing. And I let her have that. For once, I didn't try to protect her from it. I just held her while she let it all out. When she finally fell asleep on the couch beside me, I stayed right there, watching the muted flicker of the television and thinking about how much had changed in so little time. And how much more there still was to understand. I didn't know what the next day would bring. But I knew this: she trusted me again. Enough to cry beside me. Enough to be herself in front of me. And I wasn't going to lose that again. Not for anything. The following weekend brought the first true test. A family dinner at my sister's house, something we hadn't done since Christmas. Back then, everything had felt normal, or at least I'd believed it was. My daughter had smiled politely, answered questions in short replies, helped clear the table. She had played her role, masked her truth. But now, walking up the steps to my sister's front porch with her at my side and Ava walking quietly behind us, I felt the pressure in my chest building. My sister didn't know. None of them did. And suddenly, I was terrified. Not because of what they might say to my daughter, but because I wasn't sure I'd be strong enough to protect her if they said it. My daughter's hand brushed against mine before we rang the bell. Her touch was light, fleeting, but it said everything. "Are you still with me? Are we okay?" The door swung open, and my sister welcomed us with her usual big smile and tight hug. Her eyes shifted briefly to Ava, curious but polite. "And you are?" she asked, extending a hand. Ava smiled nervously, her voice quiet. "I'm Ava. I'm with her." There was a slight pause, and I could feel my sister's brain ticking. She glanced at me, then back at the girls. "Well, come in," she said eventually. Her voice didn't change, but something subtle shifted in the air. We stepped inside. The house smelled like roasted chicken and cinnamon candles. Familiar. Safe. But my daughter's shoulders stayed tense, eyes darting with every new face we passed: uncle, cousin, second cousin, all the usual crowd. She wasn't sure where she belonged here anymore. I wasn't sure either. Dinner was a cautious affair. The girls sat close together, whispering occasionally, smiling in those small ways people do when they're trying to be normal in an unfamiliar place. I watched my sister watching them, trying to gauge her thoughts. The silence between courses felt louder than it should have. Someone finally broke it, my cousin, Adam, loud and clumsy as always. "So, Ava," he said, smiling in that way that wasn't quite friendly, "you two dating or something?" My daughter stiffened, her fork pausing midair. Ava's lips parted like she might say something, but nothing came out. Everyone looked to me. I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said clearly. "They are." The table went quiet. Forks slowed. Someone cleared their throat. I waited for the blow. For the judgment. For something sharp, but then my sister let out a breath and smiled. "Well, I'm glad she's got someone who makes her happy," she said. And just like that, the tension broke. Not completely, but enough to breathe again. My daughter looked at me like she couldn't believe it. And Ava reached for her hand under the table, their fingers lacing together in the shadow of the tablecloth. Later that night, when we got home, my daughter dropped her bag by the door and leaned against the wall. Her voice was soft. "I thought it was going to be awful." "So did I admitted. She gave me a look that was somewhere between grateful and sad. I kept thinking someone would say something. That I'd have to defend her. "You didn't," I said. "And even if you did, I would have been right there." She smiled, but I could see the worry hadn't fully left her. She still expected the other shoe to drop. That's what happens when you spend too long hiding. Peace feels like something borrowed, not earned. We sat in silence for a while after that. No TV, no phones. Just the sound of the wind brushing against the windows and the soft hum of the fridge. Then she asked something I wasn't ready for. "Do you think she'll stay?" I looked at her, surprised. "Ava?" She nodded. "Yeah. I mean, what if she realizes I'm too much? Too complicated?" I shook my head. "She won't. You're not too much. You're exactly right for someone who sees you for who you really are." Her eyes welled up, but she blinked fast to keep the tears back. "I'm scared to lose her. I've never felt like this before." I moved closer and took her hand. "Then love her the best you can. Be honest. Be brave. And don't run from this just because it's new." She nodded slowly, and for a moment, she didn't look like my little girl or a grown woman. She just looked human. Fragile and fierce all at once. And I realized something in that moment. I wasn't just watching her fall in love. I was watching her become who she was always meant to be. The next morning brought rain. Not a soft drizzle, but a full, heavy downpour that turned the windows into rippling sheets of gray. I stood in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, watching the garden bend beneath the weight of water, and thought about how quiet the house felt again. My daughter was still asleep upstairs, but the quiet wasn't empty this time. It was calm. It was hers. I didn't know when exactly things had started shifting between us. Maybe it was the moment I saw her standing on that porch with Ava, or maybe it was before that, in all the little moments I missed when I wasn't paying close enough attention. But now that I was listening, I couldn't stop hearing the echoes of who she was becoming. And part of me was terrified that I'd never fully catch up. She came downstairs sometime after 10, wearing one of Ava's hoodies and dragging her feet across the floor like she used to when she was 7 and didn't want to go to school. I looked at her and smiled, gently. "Sleep okay?" She nodded, hair messy, eyes still heavy. "We were up late talking." I didn't ask what about. I could tell it had been important. There was a glow about her, a softness in her posture, the kind of quiet happiness that comes from being understood. I hesitated before I spoke again. You know, I began carefully, you can invite her over again. Even for the weekend if you want. She looked up sharply, surprised. Really? I nodded. Really? She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. Her eyes watered just slightly. You mean it? I wouldn't have said it if I didn't, I said. She stepped forward and hugged me without warning. It wasn't a long hug, but it was tight. Deep. Like she needed it more than I knew. Thank you, she whispered into my shoulder. That afternoon, Ava came over again, this time with an overnight bag and 2 sleeves of cookies she had baked herself. We sat together in the living room, all 3 of us, the girls curled under a blanket on the couch while I read a book on the other side of the room. It was quiet, but it wasn't disconnected. Every now and then, I'd hear a soft laugh or the sound of a whispered conversation, and it made something inside me soften. I realized then that I was witnessing something rare, a first love that wasn't afraid to be gentle. After dinner, they disappeared upstairs, and I let them go without question. I trusted them. That trust had taken effort, and I knew they could feel that. But sometime past midnight, I heard a knock at my door. My daughter stood there, blanket wrapped around her, eyes wide and tired. Can I talk to you? She asked. I sat up quickly and nodded. Of course. What's wrong? She stepped inside and sat at the edge of the bed. Her hands were shaking. Ava told me she might have to move. My heart dropped. Move? When? Her mom's job. They're talking about leaving next month. She looked at me, broken in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl who'd scraped her knee on the sidewalk. What if she goes, and I never see her again? I didn't have answers, and I hated that. I hated seeing her in that kind of pain, the helpless kind. Come here, I said softly. She crawled into the bed beside me, curling up like she used to. Sometimes people we love don't stay, I said gently, but that doesn't make the love any less real. Her voice cracked. But I just found her. Then hold on to her while she's here, I said. Be present. Love her with everything you have right now. That's all any of us can really do. She cried again, quietly, and I held her through it. The storm outside had passed by then, but in her chest, I could feel a different one raging. The fear of loss. The ache of uncertainty. The first heartbreak looming on the horizon like thunder in the distance that we stayed like that for a long time, and I wondered how many other mothers were lying awake that same night, holding their daughters while the world threatened to take away the one thing they couldn't protect them from, change. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't fix it. But I could be there. And sometimes, that was enough. The next few days passed with an urgency that hadn't been there before. Everything they did seemed to carry more weight, every laugh, every shared look, every moment spent hand in hand. Ava was around more, but there was a quietness to her now, a sadness tucked behind her smile. She never said it directly, but I could tell she was counting the time. My daughter felt it too, I knew she did. Her eyes followed Ava a little longer when she left the room, her voice softened when she said her name. They were trying to pretend nothing had changed, but it had. The knowledge of an end changes how you breathe. It wraps around you, even when you try to ignore it. And I could feel it wrapping around my daughter like a slow, invisible string. She stopped me one evening while I was folding towels. Her face was pale, mouth tight. I want to ask something, but I don't want you to get mad. I paused, bracing. Go ahead. Can she stay the weekend again? Maybe a little longer? Her mom's working out of town, and she doesn't want to be alone right now. I could hear the fear buried beneath the question. She was asking for more than permission. She was asking for a place to keep Ava safe. Somewhere the goodbye didn't have to come so soon. I didn't even hesitate. Of course she can. As long as she needs. Her shoulders dropped with relief. Thank you. The words sounded too small for what she meant. I didn't press. I just nodded and returned to folding, trying not to show how deeply her trust meant to me. When Ava arrived that Friday, she looked tired, like someone who hadn't been sleeping. She offered a smile, but her eyes didn't hold it long. My daughter hugged her tightly in the doorway, arms wrapped around her like she never wanted to let go. I stepped back, letting them pass, and for the rest of the night, I pretended not to notice when their conversation faded into long silences or when their hands stayed locked even while eating dinner. It wasn't about pretending everything was fine, it was about giving them space to feel what they were feeling without being asked to explain it. Later that night, I heard them talking in my daughter's room, voices low but not whispering. They weren't hiding. They were just being honest. I heard Ava say something about how she didn't want to leave, how everything here felt more like home than the apartment she'd grown up in. I heard my daughter respond with a quiet, "I don't know how to let you go." I didn't mean to listen, but I couldn't move. I stood in the hallway, frozen, heart aching, because I knew that kind of love. The kind that finds you when you aren't looking. The kind that's too big to hold and too painful to lose. That in the middle of the night, I found Ava sitting in the kitchen, alone. She was nursing a cup of tea, staring out the window at the empty backyard. Couldn't sleep? I asked softly. She shook her head, smiling without turning. Didn't want to. I sat across from her, silence stretching comfortably between us. Eventually, she spoke again. Thank you. For letting me be here. For not making me feel wrong. Her voice trembled slightly. Not everyone has that. I didn't answer right away. I thought of my daughter upstairs, asleep in a bed that used to be covered in stuffed animals and night lights. You're not wrong, I said finally. You're just young. And in love. And scared. That's all. She looked down, eyes glistening. It hurts. Knowing I'm leaving. It's like I've just started breathing and now someone's pressing on my chest again. I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over hers. Then breathe now. While you still can. She nodded slowly, holding my gaze. I love her, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to lose her. Maybe you won't, I said, though even I wasn't sure what I meant by that. I didn't know if fate was kind or cruel. I just knew that Ava meant it. Every word. Every tear she didn't let fall. When she finally went back upstairs, I sat alone in the kitchen for a while longer, the empty teacup still warm in front of me. Love was such a fragile thing. And watching them hold it in trembling hands was both beautiful and brutal. That I wished I could protect them from the goodbye I knew was coming. But I also knew some goodbyes don't arrive like doors slamming, they come quietly, slowly, through the act of waiting. And I wasn't sure which was worse. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains like gold dust, soft and warm, but the house felt colder than usual. Something unspoken hovered in the air, heavy and constant. Ava was still asleep in my daughter's room, curled into the blanket, her face peaceful in the way that only exhaustion could create. My daughter came downstairs quietly, her footsteps light, careful not to wake her. She didn't say much, just poured a glass of water and sat beside me at the kitchen table. Her eyes were distant, far away in some place where goodbyes had already started to echo. I wanted to say something comforting, something that could stitch the wound before it tore open. But the truth was, nothing I could say would make this easier. Love that's real doesn't let go quietly, and I knew they were already beginning to feel that unraveling. She's leaving on Tuesday, she said finally. Her voice didn't crack, but it was heavy with pressure, like glass about to break. I nodded slowly. Do you know what you want to do? She shrugged, wiping at her eye quickly with the sleeve of her hoodie. I want to stop time, she whispered. I want to go back 2 months and live it all over again, but slower. I want to memorize every second I spent with her. I reached across the table and took her hand. You still have time. Not much, but some. What you do with it now, that's what you'll carry after. She swallowed hard, nodding. I want to make it count. And for the rest of that day, she tried. They stayed close, inseparable in the way that only young love allows. They laughed more than I expected, played old songs on her Bluetooth speaker, baked a cake they completely ruined but still ate while giggling through frosting-covered fingers. They sat in the backyard that night, just the two of them, under the stars with nothing but a thin blanket and each other's warmth. I watched from the window, saw my daughter reach out and tuck Ava's hair behind her ear, the way she tilted her head to listen even when nothing was being said. It was quiet intimacy. Not the kind meant for display, but the kind that runs deep, like a thread through the chest. Later, when the lights were out and the house had settled into stillness, I stood outside her room for a moment, unsure if I should knock. I didn't want to interrupt, but something pulled at me, something that felt like finality. I opened the door slowly. They were both awake, lying side by side, not talking, just holding hands. My daughter looked up at me, her eyes red but calm. Come in, she said softly. I stepped inside and sat at the foot of the bed. I just wanted to say how proud I am of you, I said. For loving the way you do. For being brave. Ava gave me a faint smile, her fingers still intertwined with my daughter's. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. I looked at them, really looked, two girls on the edge of something too big for their age, too deep for words. I wished I could stop time for them. I wished I had that power. But all I could do was witness their love and give it room to exist without shame, without fear. When I left the room, I stood in the hallway for a long time, heart aching, tears gathering quietly in my eyes. It wasn't fair. Not just because they had to say goodbye, but because the world rarely makes space for young queer love to be honored in the way it deserves. And yet, in this small house, in this fragile window of time, they had found something real. Something many people never get to experience that I didn't know what the next few days would bring. Whether they'd fight the distance or let it close like a door behind them. But I knew one thing with certainty, this love, however brief, would leave an imprint. On them. On me. On this home. And even as the hours slipped away faster than either of them wanted, the story they had written together would not be forgotten. Not by me. Not by her. Not by the girl who had learned how to breathe for the first time in someone else's arms. Tuesday came too fast. The morning felt unreal, as if the hours were stitched together wrong. The sun rose like it always did, the same warmth spilling over the walls, but everything felt quiet in a different way, too still, like the air itself was bracing for a goodbye it didn't want to carry. Ava's bag sat by the front door, neatly zipped, the small stuffed rabbit keychain on the zipper trembling slightly when someone walked past. My daughter sat beside it on the floor, knees pulled up to her chest, her head resting lightly on Ava's shoulder. Neither of them spoke. They had run out of words the night before. Now, they sat in the soft silence that comes when love has said all it can. That I stood in the kitchen, pretending to be busy, wiping a counter that didn't need cleaning, fighting the lump in my throat that had been forming since sunrise. I kept thinking about the night they met, the moments that led here, the unfolding of something so beautiful it almost felt too fragile to be real. But it was real. It had happened. And I had watched it with my own eyes, two people finding each other in a world that often refuses to make space for them. When Ava finally stood, my daughter rose with her, hands still laced tightly. She looked smaller somehow, like the strength that had carried her these past weeks had left her bones all at once. Ava turned to me first. Thank you, she said. For letting me stay. For letting us exist here. I swallowed hard and nodded, stepping forward to hug her. She was warm and trembling and brave. You'll always have a place here, I whispered. Always. The drive to the train station was quiet. I offered to go with them, but they chose to do it alone. I understood. Some goodbyes need to happen in their own world, away from witnesses. When they returned an hour later, my daughter walked in alone. Her eyes were red, her shoulders set. She didn't speak right away, just walked into the living room and collapsed into the couch, curling into herself like she was trying to disappear. I sat beside her, not saying anything. I didn't need to. She reached for my hand and gripped it hard, the silence between us full of everything she didn't know how to say. I held on just as tightly. That night she cried in her sleep. I heard it through the walls, soft, broken sounds that pulled at something deep in my chest. I almost went to her room, but I knew she needed to feel it, to let it wash over her without interruption. The next morning she was quiet, but something in her was different. Worn down, yes, but also clear. Like the storm had passed and left behind a new kind of sky. She made her own breakfast, cleaned up the dishes without being asked, and then sat with me on the back porch, sipping tea like she had grown years overnight. I don't regret it, she said suddenly. Any of it. I looked at her and nodded. I didn't think you would. She smiled faintly, eyes tired but honest. It hurts, she admitted. But I think it was supposed to. That's how you know it was real, I replied. The best things always leave a mark. We sat there for a long time, the silence no longer heavy but comforting. I knew the pain wasn't over, and I knew the healing would come in pieces. But I also knew she'd be okay. She had loved. She had lost. And she had survived it at in the weeks that followed. She slowly began to return to herself. Not the old version, but something new. She picked up her sketchbook again. She joined her friends for weekend coffee trips. She laughed at stupid shows on the TV. She still looked at her phone sometimes like she expected it to light up with Ava's name. Sometimes it did. Texts. Pictures. Little notes from a different city, a different life. But it wasn't the same, and she knew that. Still, she held on to those messages like keepsakes from a place she once belonged to. I never asked too many questions. I just stayed near, letting her have her space but reminding her she wasn't alone. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned golden, she stood beside me in the kitchen while I cooked dinner. Out of nowhere, she said, I want to write about it. I looked at her, surprised. About Ava? She nodded. About all of it. Maybe someone else out there is going through the same thing and feels like they're the only one. I felt a wave of something strong rise in my chest, pride, maybe. Or hope. I think that's a beautiful idea. She smiled, soft and sure. Yeah. I think it's time. Some stories don't have neat endings. They don't tie themselves up in perfect bows or offer the kind of closure we crave. But they're still worth telling. Because they happened. Because they mattered. Because they changed us. My daughter's story was one of them. And I had the honor of watching her live it. That if you felt something in this story, something soft, something aching, something real, don't forget to share it. Maybe someone else needs to hear it too. Maybe someone out there is still waiting to be seen. Let this be the hand that reaches them. Because love, even when it ends, deserves to be remembered.